Hello, my friends. I'm glad you're here. What happens when we blink? The long answer is pretty obvious. We blink to clean our eyes, to keep them moist. But we also blink to allow our brains to process incoming images and stimulate our retinas. In the flash of time it takes to blink, our brains also do a momentary reset in an attempt to allow mental information to form and be considered. But during that time, for the briefest of moments, our brains stop. What happens during that time? That time we don't notice we aren't thinking, aren't looking, aren't processing. The short answer is everything. Close your eyes and enter the blink space. It was hot. Damn hot. The road ahead wiggled and buckled from the heat, and in the Dart's rearview mirror, Petra could see the road behind her doing the same thing. The wind buffeted her from the open windows, letting in the Sonoran heat. The Dart had switches that claimed to be air conditioning, but she had long ago concluded they were simple decoration. The only thing worse than the hot wind blasting through the car's cabin was the soul smelter it turned into when she closed the windows. At 70 miles an hour, this wind was a hurricane. She looked through the rear view, and the road, still twisting like a snake in mirage, spread out empty behind her. Empty! She slowed down and turned her head. The road was empty for at least 5 or 10 miles. Then, a flicker. The little flame of hope puffed out as the flicker resolved enough for her to recognize the green Challenger coming over the hill. Still 10 miles behind is better than here. She floored the accelerator pedal, hoping to coax a few more miles per hour out of the Dart's engine, but it was clear the only way she was going to go faster was to suddenly discover downhill, and an impossible patch of luck. "The Dart's a great car," he told her. "I can keep it in tune for you and work on it for you," he said. "It'll never let you down," he said. She glanced back into the rearview mirror. "I've been let down," she muttered. She pressed the pedal harder against the floor, mostly because it felt a little better, as if she could push the car a tiny bit faster with the pressure. 10 miles was a 10-minute lead, and that was better than nothing. She rubbed the back of her head carefully, and her hand came back with a little blood on it. "Bastard," she said. It shouldn't have caught her by surprise. She was smarter than that. Over the past 3 years, Corey's mind had started fraying, and his responses became unpredictable and sometimes violent. Everything had seemed fine. It seemed hunky-dory up until that point. But by the time things got really bad, Petra could review her entire history with this man and see every little cascade of pebbles that led to the eventual avalanche. She nodded grimly to herself in answer to the question that always followed. Yes, it was true she ignored a few signs. But love does strange things, and you always hope it turns out better than it would, that the mountainside would settle down and the shifts mellow out and everything would return to normal. No such thing had happened, however. Things simply grew worse and worse, and she started to understand better the entire picture. She started seeing the pattern the way she ought to have seen it from the beginning. She started seeing the monster he had been hiding. She should have been ready for the first blow. It caught her just behind her right ear. Had she not suddenly turned her head as she came into the motel room, it would have been on the side of her head, maybe even right in the face. She wasn't even sure what it was that struck her, a lamp or a piece of chair or whatever, but it rang her bells bad and she fell to the floor. His face came in above her, the face of the man she loved, the man she married, the man who asked her out on a surprise weekend vacation to the middle of the Mexican desert. His face wavered like a heat mirage, and his words came out like soup, and she knew it was something in her brain that made it that way, that jumbled his face and words. She knew he had hit something important. She raised her arm as he swung the thing again, and a detonation of pain numbed her arm. He roared inarticulately, or maybe she couldn't understand him, and raised it again, but then the room was flooded with sunlight, and she heard voices shouting in Spanish and saw other people at the door. The man who ran the place, the maid, and someone else. They also wavered in her vision. One of them seemed to have a baseball bat. Corey lunged at them, and all four dissolved in her mind into a mass of screaming blows. Somehow she rolled onto all fours and crawled past them, out into the sunlight, and pulled herself into the dart. Her arm was no longer numb, and for that she was glad, but only a little, as the whole thing throbbed and pulsed in pain. It didn't feel broken, but at this level of pain there was hardly a difference. Most importantly, she had managed to start it and drive away, her arm screaming, her brain thick and garbled, and blood seeping down her neck and into her shirt. At least the blood flow had stopped. It was only oozing. Still, she knew she would have to do something about it as soon as she had time. She'd been driving for nearly 2 hours. She looked back again. About 10 miles of desert road spanned the space between she and Corey's Challenger. She kept the pedal pressed against the floorboard and tried not to think about what must have happened at the motel. Ahead in the distance of the heat mirage, she saw a break. A dark smudge, something in the road. Maybe a town. Maybe something else. It was a house. It rose above the desert, alone and dark, like an ancient hand with towers and high windows. It didn't belong here, she knew. It was an anachronism, something from the turn of the century, a Gothic and forbidding import from a time and place that no longer existed. As it grew closer, she could see that it was huge, 4 stories at least. She looked at the fuel gauge and decided this had to be the place. A quarter tank wasn't going to take her much further anyways. She swerved from the road, fish-tailed into the courtyard, wheels skidding over gravel. The house loomed above her as she tumbled out of the dart and slammed the door. "Anyone home?" she called out. "Help!" She ran to the door and pounded on it, but only silence and echoes replied. She tried the lever. Although it was rusted stiff, it cracked free, clanging down, and the door swung open. "Hello?" she called out as she stepped into the gloom. "Hello, are you here? Is anybody here?" There was still no answer. Dust lay thick on every surface, and the air was still, dry, and dead. 10 minutes. Probably less. She ran through the house, calling out and searching for anything to help her. Maybe she would find an old hunting rifle, or pistols, or maybe something else. Petra raced through every room, pulled open drawers, shuffled through ancient papers, objects, and artifacts. She touched everything, looked everywhere, and finally, she saw the stairs leading down. It was absurd to think of a house with a deep basement in the middle of the Mexican desert. It made no sense. She was about to turn away when she heard the revving growl of the Challenger's engine as it pulled up in the courtyard. She hissed and ran down the stairs. The stairs went deep. The walls changed as she descended, becoming more rocky, and she realized the house had been built over whatever this was, a cave or cavern or something. Streaks of phosphorescent material lined the walls and ceiling above her, and by the time she reached the floor level and stumbled out across the dirt floor, the room around her was lit enough to read by. She stepped through the hall, avoiding a couple of stones on the floor, around a corner and into a temple. It had to be a temple. It couldn't be anything else. Grooves and designs in the floor radiated from the altar to the lowest end of the room, and even the phosphorescent material followed those rows. Chairs and benches and old church pews had been dragged down here and situated around the altar in a semicircle. Petra walked past the pews, drawn toward the altar, eyes wide in wonder and fear. Her head twinged again, and she reached up and felt it. Her fingers came back wet with blood, but still no more than in the car. The altar was wide and formed a shallow bowl. It was carved all over, some in fine script she couldn't read, and also in pictures she could. One in particular, a central image, was a snake rising hypnotically from the spiral of flame. It held her eyes, and she gazed long at the carving. It seemed to be the oldest, most worn carving on the altar. She trailed a finger up the snake's carved body to the head, and her finger moved perfectly in the groove. Then she saw the streaks of blood left over from her head. "Oh no," she whispered. She scrubbed it off with her shirt sleeve. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the snake. "I know no one's been down here for a long time, and I didn't mean to make a mess. Sorry." She looked at it, and it looked clean, and smoothed out her sleeve. There was no blood on it. She looked back at the sculpture and at her sleeve. No blood on either. Maybe it was just moisture, not blood. Maybe... "Petra, goddammit!" She jumped as if bit as Corey's deep voice bellowed from the top of the stairs. She stood up, searching for a way out, but the temple was a dead end. It was a cavern that the stairs led to. There was nowhere she could run. Against the wall, at the back of the temple, were cupboards. Also random furniture that must have been brought down to hold supplies, clothes, food, whatever. She dashed over and tried the knobs, and nearly laughed in joy when she found one that was empty, and practically her size. She squeezed in and closed the door behind her. Just as the latch clicked, she heard his heavy footsteps coming down the stairs. A slivered crack above the hinge offered her a view of the temple. Only a few degrees, but she could see the altar, could even see the snake on it, which must have been a trick of light and shadows, as the carving seemed weirdly in motion. "I wish you were alive," she whispered. "I need your help, anybody's help, so much." "Petra?" He was in the room. She froze, staring at the snake, wishing herself tiny and invisible. He stomped past her field of vision, carrying the baseball bat, which was now dark-stained. He walked up to the front of the room, to the altar, and looked around it. "I know you're down here," he muttered. "I can smell that fucking perfume." He bounced the bat against the top of the altar, emphasizing each word. "You and I need to have a little talk, Petra. A little talk, you know. Just a little talk." He walked over to one side, out of her field of view. "That's all I wanted," he said. "Just to talk. You didn't have to drive away. You didn't have to leave me. It was a mess, baby, a real mess. All I wanted was to talk." He slammed the bat against something she couldn't see, probably one of the pews or chairs. She jumped a little. Not much, but a little. And he was silent. She knew this silence. It was his crafty silence. Her eyes locked onto the snake, pleaded, begged, and then the cabinet door whipped open. She screamed and flailed out, tried to ward him away, but he reached in and grabbed her. His fingers closed around the hair of the back of her head, and he yanked hard, and she tumbled out onto the floor. "Knock it off," he said, and she felt her head jerk sideways as the bat connected. She tried to twist, tried to turn, but it wasn't quite working. Her eyes darted around the room, and his shadow fell over her. He swung the bat again, twice, and her ribs burst in a flower of pain. She heaved and felt the grating of broken bone. She screamed, and it was deep and guttural. She tasted blood. "Shut up," he screamed, and stomped on her chest, cutting the scream off with a whoosh. The pain was stars and rays of light and a bomb of unbelievable agony. Her eyes focused briefly on the altar, briefly on the snake, and she knew she could see it moving, could see it looking at her. Please, she tried to beg. Nothing came out but blood. Corey hefted the bat. "I only wanted to talk." He swung the bat down, and she stopped trying to speak. "I only just wanted to talk." He swung again. "I'm no different than anyone else." He swung again. "I have needs, and I need to be heard." He swung it again. "It's not that hard, is it?" He swung again. Just fucking listen to me once in a while, bitch." He swung the bat again. Then he stopped. He stopped and looked at her, at what was left of her. He knelt down, poking at her with the bat, which had splintered as much as she had. Slowly, he started to nod. "Good," he said. "You needed to listen. I'm your husband. You've got to obey me." He stood up, sniffed, wiped the sweat out of his eyes with his sleeve. A bright red streak crossed his forehead. "Well, okay," he said. He pointed the bat at her one last time, just in case, but she was never going to get up. He stared at her. "Okay then, fuck this." He threw the bat to the other end of the room. It bounced off the rock wall and fell at the foot of the altar. "Bye, Petra," he said. "It's been real." He stomped across the room and up the stairs. At the top of the stairs, he stopped, puffing from exertion. The room seemed bright after the dim light of the cavern, and he blinked away a few stars before stepping out. He looked around for a minute. Maybe there was something here of value, something that he could take that would make up for this fucking mess. He spent a whole minute squinting through the dusty air, just letting his breath catch back up with him. Some of this shit looked like antiques, but it was all run down, all dusty and faded and cracked. He shook his head. The best thing he could get from this place would be distance. He walked across the room and opened the door, but the lever slipped through his fingers and the door closed, blown by a brief wind. He reached again, but this time the lever, having rusted for years, finally broke off, leaving only a jagged stump of red metal in the door. "The fuck?" he said. He knelt and looked at the knob. He poked at it with a fingernail, but it wouldn't move. It was completely fused by rust. Okay, fine. He looked around and picked up a vase. He walked over to the window and heaved the vase through. Except it didn't go through. It bounced off the ancient glass and shattered on the floor at his feet. He stared at the uncracked, unmarked window. Next to the fireplace, he found a poker and came back to the window. He swung the poker, but it also bounced off the glass, skidding off his shoulder in the process. The other 3 floor windows similarly resisted his attempts to break them. Then he heard it. It was a whisper in the air. A whisper just outside of his own brain, a whisper that felt like the whole house coming alive. He heard a voice in it. "Who's there?" he called out. "Who's in here? Look, I'm done. Just let me out and I'm done." The whispering continued, intensified, became soft voices he could just not quite hear. "I'm serious. You let me out of here or I'll fuck you up." He brandished the poker. "You don't think I will? You better check your basement, assholes." He spun and tripped on a folded rug and fell. He scrambled back to his feet and waved the poker around some more. Where the hell were they? Then he heard voices. Distinct voices in the whispering. And one voice in particular. A voice that sounded soft, yet precise. A voice that was in the whole house, and in his own ears. "Imbalance," it said. "There is imbalance. You are imbalance." He looked around, because it sure sounded like someone right behind him. But there was no one there. "Where the fuck are you?" The voices whispered to him, and he heard a few words distinctly. He heard "we" and "here," and some other word that his mind couldn't understand, some syllable he couldn't grasp. The soft, deep voice spoke. "My children," it said, "my hunger, my children, my arms. Balance," it said. Damn, it sounded exactly in his ear, like someone was right there. Corey swung blindly behind him, but hit nothing. He crouched and turned, and again he tripped on a fold of carpet. This time the poker skittered across the floor. He clambered to his feet and stepped over to collect his weapon, but fell again. His foot was wrapped up with a length of diamond-patterned carpet runner from the hallway. He reached to untangle his foot and stopped, frozen. Another loop of carpet runners swang lazily over his leg. It settled like a broad hand, gripping his calf. "Balance," whispered the voice, and the runner started moving. He beat at it with his hands, but it heaved and buckled and twitched and lifted itself into the air. He was jerked flat and then raised up by his foot, suspended in the air. He screamed, and it was a hoarse, girlish scream. The carpet runner swung him about, and he saw the entire length of it slithering through and filling the hallway. It moved him through the air and toward the basement door. He kicked and screamed and tried to bend upwards to stop it, but it was steel cable as far as he was concerned. It weaved and slithered and brought him down into the basement, into the temple. He had not left her on the altar, he was sure of that, but when the runner lifted him high into the air, even upside down, he saw that her body was cradled on the altar, which he had not done. She was naked, and he could see other marks on her from other times she had been trouble. His mind started to fragment even more. "No," the voice whispered, and this time in its silent strength it shook the room. "You are not leaving yet," it said. "There is an imbalance." "What imbalance?" he screamed, and spittle flew out and into his eye. The runner dropped him to the floor, and he tried to roll, to stand up, but it wrapped itself around his waist, held him upright and in place. He struggled, clawed at it, but it wouldn't budge. "My children and I," said the voice, "need our hands, need her. She is our hands. She is our—" It searched for the word. "Our priestess. You took our hands just when she came. You took them, and now there is an imbalance. I need my hands. My children need their hands. We need our priestess." "What? She's never been here before. She's not your priestess. She's my fucking wife." "She gave the promise," the voice said. "She gave her blood. She gave herself." On the altar there was a twisting, winding, glowing thread, a finger-wide tracing in the form of a snake. The other lines on the altar lit up, a dark, rich red. On the altar, Petra sat up. Corey giggled, because there wasn't enough of her to know how to stand up. She looked like a doll without a head. His mind cracked more deeply. She stepped from the altar and stood behind it. She reached down and picked up the bat. It was splintered and broken and soaked in blood. Chunks of bone and hair clung to it. She held the bat to her body, ran it over the surface, poked at the exposed, shattered ribs. Where she touched, the bones knit. Where the bat passed, the flesh sealed and healed. Even bruises disappeared. He watched as the bat replaced brain and blood and snot, rebuilt her skull, and replaced skin and hair. She was beautiful again, more beautiful than he had seen her in years. She practically glowed. "Petra?" he said. "Honey?" Slowly her eyes rose to meet his. She shook her head softly. "I promised," she said, and her voice was the softest steel he'd ever heard. "I gave myself, body and soul. I was accepted." She held the bat out in front of her. It was no longer splintered. It looked new. "You had no right to take me back," she said. "You're my wife." "No, I am not yours any more. I am his." She touched the altar, and the symbols flared. In the room around him, he heard the voices again, and now she could see where they came from. Now he could see the floor and walls of the temple constantly moving with a layer of snakes, of black snakes and red snakes and white snakes and yellow snakes, of snakes with stripes, of snakes with spots and rings and patterns. They all whispered as they watched him. "I belong to him, and I belong to his children. You are an imbalance. I am whole, and now there is an imbalance. Now there is something needed. You are needed to rebalance it all. Your flesh, your blood." She stepped back, and the muscular bands of diamond-patterned carpet runner lifted him in the air and lay him atop the altar. "No," he whispered, not believing. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm not as strong as you, so I'm afraid it will take longer." She swung the bat, and he screamed. If you've enjoyed this story, many more can be found in the collection of short stories by Edward Martin III, Close Your Eyes, Tales from the Blank Space, available at Hellbender Media at hellbendermedia.com. Also, please consider joining their Patreon at patreon.com/hellbendermedia. This story was written by Edward Martin III and recorded and edited by Andrew Wakefield, who can be found at youtube.com/@awake since 1963.